Well, hello there. Thanks for joining me. I am Dr. Jen, and I'm so pleased you're educating yourself by listening to today's show. If you've been listening for a while, you may notice that the topics are off the beaten path. Things like what do you do if a tenant passes away in your unit, how a landlord says no, and other awkward topics like after the fact permits. And I keep hearing about this tool called skip tracing. What is that? I had no idea what it was. So I looked into it and found out there is a tool to find folks who are trying to hide, like tenants who have left with a big bill to pay. Now, I tried and tried and tried to get a guest to interview today, but let's face it, folks that are in this industry, skip tracing, private investigation, whatever you want to call it, they're not necessarily interested in guesting on a podcast. So you're stuck with me. I must also give you the disclaimer on this one that this is not legal advice. This is simply informational for your intellect and education. I highly recommend that you do your own research for your local area and your situation. In today's episode, I'll talk about what skip tracing is, how it works, what it costs, and oh yeah, is this even legal in both the US and in Canada? Okay, let's get right into it. Skip tracing. It's a legal action that involves locating someone to serve with legal documents. You're trying to find them. It can also be, here's another definition I found, the art of collecting information on a hard-to-find individual in order to locate them. And the term skip tracing, it's two words, skip and tracing. So skip derives from the commonly used phrase to skip town and refers to the person who needs to be found, and tracing refers to the act of tracing them down, skip tracing. So skip tracing involves qualified process servers. And I say those three words, qualified process servers, in quotes. So I Googled that term and found out that process servers frequently skip trace to find people. This is pretty interesting. So how does this work? It's a method to look for public documents, interview people who are close to the subject, and potentially engage in surveillance. This seems like really high-tech stuff. But process servers can also look at the subject's online presence as well as other specific skip tracing software that, quite frankly, frightens me. Apparently there is other subscription-based databases that are not available to the general public when you're talking about process servers and skip tracing. So here's the kind of things that a skip tracer can provide. This is kind of interesting because this is not normal. Like if you did a Google search for some of the stuff, you can't find it. So here's what you can find: driver's license, vehicle registration and title, credit reports, credit card applications, loan applications, job applications, phone number databases, utility bills, flight records, department store, customer loyalty cards, consumer fraud, public tax information, public record databases, criminal background checks, courthouse records, no known heirs, estate, people who are key witnesses in a lawsuit, person who owes debt, defendant's absence. Now you might be saying to yourself, yeah, some of this is I can find for myself, and I can too, but for part of it, but there are limits. You're going to get to a point where you can't find everything, and finding someone who doesn't want to be found can cost time, money, and energy that may overall take longer and be really impossible, that might force you to hire a skip tracer to find them. Further, a process server is highly technological in their searches in their software and other resource sites, which we mentioned may not be public. Skip tracers are also a very small niche industry, and they can collaborate with each other, which is interesting. So if you're trying to do this by yourself, you don't have the same network that they do. They have a lot more resources because they want people to be found, especially hard to find people. So how long does a skip trace take? Well, from what I could see on the researching skip tracing and process servers, the duration of time depends on how much the process server has to dig to find the information on the subject person. Some services can be as quick as 48 hours. Others could take up to 10 days or longer, especially when interviews or surveillance comes into play. But how much does it cost? So I checked in both the US and Canada, and both were about the same range of costs, and the pricing actually surprised me. I was expecting some big price tag, but the range was between $20 and $350, depending on what the skip tracer has to do. One site in Canada offered skip tracing for a $189 flat fee. So a landlord looking for a tenant, whether in the US and Canada, is somewhat affordable, but it depends on what I like to call the grief to dollars ratio. If your judgment that you're considering hiring a skip tracer for to find this person, if the judgment is only for $500, it may not be worth the $200 to hire someone. Maybe you just forgive that debt and move on. But what if your judgment is for $10,000? A skip tracer for $200 might be worth it to you. Skip tracing, from what I found, is legal in both the US and Canada, and they put a great big asterisk next to that. In Canada, and if an individual or a business is seeking skip tracing services as a standalone service, such as searching for a lost relative or ex-spouse, so someone related, a professional skip tracer must be hired, not a collections agency. However, in Canada, if you're looking for a non-relative, it looks like you have to gain your judgment or order from the provincial court and then hire a collection agency to do your skip tracing for you. Now, in the US, it is also legal to practice skip tracing as long as you're not breaking the law to retrieve the information you're looking for. Examples of illegal ways to skip trace are obtaining information or accessing private documentation without consent. You must always be honest in your intentions and make sure you check your local laws and business regulations. A professional skip tracer is going to abide by federal, state, provincial, and local laws, which is critical in this whole process when you're trying to find a tenant. So that when a skip tracer is looking for someone to find for you, they are in their specific scope of work. If you hire a collections agency that has skip tracing as a part of it, it may be different than just hiring the skip tracer alone. Meaning, if you're hiring a collections agency that does skip tracing and also collections as a part of their scope of work, then you may end up as the end result with some money that is given to you from the collections agency. However, if you are just hiring a skip tracer, all they may do is find the person for you and nothing else. So you want to be clear on what you're buying. So one company that I talked to but didn't want to be on the show said this: more often than not, we get a lot of landlords that are trying to serve former tenant for costs associated to their rental agreement, but the landlord is unable to locate them or serve them. The court then will likely ask the landlord to get a skip tracing done if a service has been unsuccessful. Private eye companies like ourselves run skip tracing in accordance to the law and attempt to locate the subject. It is pretty straightforward. We receive a call or an email. We review the legal right for someone to request a locate, typically via their attorney or legal paperwork that is pending a skip trace. And then we conduct and locate, and we prepare a report for the client with the information on the current subject's current address. So in that instance, what they're talking about is just finding the person. And so that's the deliverable that the skip tracer is talking about, is saying, look, you want to serve someone, here's where you serve them. Then you can hire a bailiff or a sheriff and you can serve them, or however you want to do it. Your attorney maybe can serve them. So the whole concept of skip tracing seems very spy versus spy to me, but it's very interesting. And I've never actually had to do a skip tracing. So if this is something that might be beneficial to you, make sure you're looking into it more. Get into the Google search called skip tracing, and then your general location, like skip tracing Manitoba or skip tracing Texas. Or if you've got an attorney that you're working with on your landlording, talk with them as well. But I encourage you to check out this topic and if it can be a useful tool for you. Thanks for listening to me today. If you enjoyed today's show, the biggest compliment you can give me is by leaving a review so that people who need my podcast can find me. Remember, you don't have to be afraid as a landlord. You just have to educate yourself. Join me next week for episode 83 for one of the most dynamic people I know. She is an internationally trained pottery maker, an incredible grant writer, and a Canadian landlord of a duplex. Leanna Carlson is on next week to tell us about it all. I'll see you there.